think we're recording. Hi,
We
this
are.
is Pure Portugal. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to be starting the first part of a multi-video catch-up, hopefully, with Dom and family, who are family. We're going to be following you, basically, aren't we, Dom, from beginning to end? Fingers crossed,
Yep.
on your journey of getting a D7 visa, the elusive D7 visa. Yep. So Dom's very kindly said he's making a series of YouTube videos to follow the journey, and we're going to be catching up and sort of dipping in and out of the journey as we go and see how you're doing, so we can get a real life version of events. Thanks for joining us.
As it happens, and my pleasure. It's nice to see you, and hello to everyone who's watching.
Yeah, it's great. I think it'll be really nice to get a feel. We were just talking, weren't we, before we hit record? You know, it's quite nice, I think, for people to get a feel for how the real version of things is, as opposed to the online how it might be version. It's not really always the same thing.
The actuality versus the Facebook version.
Yes, exactly. The warts and all. And it's great because you know, it can dispel, hopefully we can dispel some of the myths and the misinformation, which is all often done with the most genuine, you know, people are trying to help, but there can be a lot of misinformation out there, especially post-Brexit, where these new types of visa, certainly new to the UK anyway, are very, very different. You know, it's a different way of everybody having to apply to move and things like that. So I think it's be nice to follow a real family doing it, really. Yeah.
So where would you like to start?
From the very beginning, of course. Yeah. So you've decided you wanted to move to Portugal, but you're living in your van now, and you've been traveling around for a little while. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're a family of 7 essentially. So that's myself, my wife, my daughter Rosie, who's 12, 2 cats and 2 dogs, and we left the UK, metaphorically speaking, nearly 2 years ago, when we left our semi-detached house and moved into a self-converted Sprinter van to travel and adventure and experience a bit more of the world. So we've been doing that for nearly 2 years. And obviously before we left, Brexit was about to complete several years ago. So we didn't really know what would happen. I told you the dog would join in.
Mine will in a minute.
So in the course of our journey and our travel, we've spent a lot of time predominantly in Spain and Portugal, and we decided not that long ago that we were going to go for the D7 visa for Portugal.
Yeah.
And we started looking at how we could do that, and the pros and the cons, how easy it was to do, what you needed to do it, and so on and so on, which led us to obviously speaking to you.
Yeah. And the D7, was it a clear path as to that was the way to go? Because I know you mentioned to me before we were talking, you know, before we started talking now, that originally you looked at Spain, and Spain is a much more complex route. Is it that the D7 was the easiest route into Portugal in that sense, or was there a particular reason you chose that way?
I think it was a long sort of journey in our mind, because we were aware of everything that was happening with Brexit, as I said to you a short while ago. And the transition period, we knew it was coming to the end. January the 1st was coming, but there was no deal, and we didn't know if there was going to be a deal, and if there was, what it was, and if there wasn't, what that would mean.
Yeah.
So we were aware of the restrictions to people that travel full-time like ourselves, the 90/180 limitations, but we kind of had this false hope that maybe that wouldn't be the case, and we'd get a deal where UK nationals or citizens could travel for longer, or that would be an easy visa so that we could keep traveling.
Yeah.
So we have friends who live in Spain, and they've lived there for a long time, but they have had a lot of problems with their residency application.
Yeah.
So we started looking at visas, and there's all kinds of stuff popping up. There's like the digital nomad visa for Croatia. There's easy applications pre-Brexit for Bulgaria, but still relatively easy. So we had thought about Bulgaria. So it really wasn't until sort of December and then into the beginning of January, when the transition ended and we officially were no longer in the EU, that we thought, Well, Portugal became our first choice because we like decent weather. And I know in parts of the north it can be colder in the winter and so on, but generally speaking, Portugal's got a lovely climate most of the year. And we like the idea of living somewhere fairly remote, out of the way. Land is relatively cheap compared to a lot of other places in Europe, very beautiful as well. So when we started to look at visas, when you Google for visas for Portugal, you get a lot of websites that seem to be predominantly aimed at motorhomers or affluent retirees, maybe looking at the golden visa.
Yes.
We came across the D7 visa, and we read up on that and we said, oh, that sounds pretty good. So we then went to the Portuguese websites. We couldn't find anything called a D7 visa. There's nothing up there. So
that would be way too easy.
That would be way too easy. So we're relatively impulsive, so we then decided, okay, that's what we're going to do. So where do we start? How do we complete this process? So then when we started looking around, to mention what you said earlier, there was a lot of negativity particularly on Facebook, around how hard it was, around issues for travellers like us who've got a self-build camper van. How do you take that to Portugal? All kinds of rumours online that it wasn't possible, it wasn't easy, you couldn't do it, and so on and so on. So we thought, well, that can't be true, or maybe it is. Let's find out. So we decided to document that process. I can't remember.
And you found a great way through as well. You found that you can, as I know you were saying, that you found, you can take your home over, which is great. And of course, having this D7 visa, I think, as you say, there's a lot of mystery around it and there's a lot of confusion around it because, especially from the UK, people haven't ever had to be concerned about how they come to Portugal before or how they travel to any country before. They just off they go. I'm sure it will become a little bit easier over time. And it certainly seems, from what I know of the D7, that it seems like a pretty reasonable way to go, actually. I can see why a lot of people would end up going that way. It's not maybe as scary as some people seem to think it is, and as rigid. I think it probably will offer a fair few people an option to move over. Do you think?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think in simple terms, I think the D7 visa is actually really, really straightforward.
Yeah.
What perplexes it is the fact that there isn't much information from the Portuguese government that's obvious, i.e. a website where you can go and it says, this is how you apply. And there is some of that information out there, but it's all a bit vague and a bit fluffy.
Yeah.
And and I don't mean this to be insulting to Portuguese officials, but their websites seem to be, quite antiquated and a bit clunky.
Okay,
so
yeah.
We decided, well, we'll look at the information and then we'll find everything out primarily for ourselves, and then we'll share that with other people, and we'll kind of hopefully put some of the concerns to bed so that it becomes easier for other people. So in reality, the process is really, really simple. What's missing, the lack of information from Portugal to
show how simple it really is. Yeah.
How easy it is.
Yeah.
So you've got matriculation of your van, which is a kind of online thing that you can't do that. So if you have a self-build vehicle, you can forget Portugal is the kind of vibe online. Then there's all kinds of misinformation about passive income, assets, what you need to apply for the visa.
Yeah, I've seen a few things where people say you've got to have savings in the bank for this amount of time, and no, you don't. You have to prove you have a rolling income coming in, and there's so many different versions of the same story. It's crazy.
So the long and the short of all that is where we're at is we found out that most non-Portuguese websites call the visa a D7, and that there's actually a multitude of different D visas for different types of applicants. So, for example, a D2, which is for somebody that wants to move in to do agricultural work in Portugal and become a resident. So when you go to the Portuguese website for the embassy or the consul, they don't call it a D7, they call it a national visa. So to start with, we were like, well, what's a national visa? For the national visa, and there's nothing to tell you what the national visa is or how you apply for it.
Yeah.
So what we've then done is we've done loads of research. We've talked to other people that have already had successful applications, and we've tried to put all the different things together to come out with, this is the best way to make your application. And
Well
then it
done.
becomes, when you know what you need to do, it's actually not that difficult. And it's really
it's always the problem though, isn't it? It's the lack of the initial information that then creates the hearsay and the very, very incorrect info that gets spread around. It's like a rumor almost on social media. And before you know it, it's a monster that's been created, and people are, you've got to have thousands in the bank, and you've got to, there's so many different versions of things, aren't there?
Absolutely, yeah.
So where are you at the moment in your process? I mean, has the virus situation slowed it down? Obviously, other than you physically moving over, how is the visa progress going at the moment for you?
I mean, in terms of finding out everything to get from A to B and finish the application, we've done all that, so we know everything that we need to know. And we've been collecting up the information that's required to get an appointment and process the application. So in short, that is you need a DBS check for everyone in the application. So that was the first thing that we did. So we did that for myself and for Missy, my wife. That takes about a week. So you go onto the government website, you make your application, they then come back with your DBS is clear, or if you've got any other problems or whatever. So ours came back clear. Then you wait about a week for them to send a certificate in the post. So that's one thing ticked off. And then there's vague information from the Portuguese side on exactly what you may or may not require for the lucrative or passive income side. So we decided that we would just give them everything, so that they couldn't actually then say they didn't have enough. So we're waiting for our accountant to come back with a legalized statement from her to state this is what our assets are worth. May not require, but we figured if we have it, then it won't slow down our application. Then you need to prove to the embassy that you have either property that you already own in Portugal, which is unlikely, or that you have a campsite booked that you're going to live at for 120 days minimum while you complete the second part of the visa. So I'll backtrack a bit, because essentially the visa is in two parts. The first part is a permit that allows you to travel to Portugal, which overrides the Schengen 90 over 180 days. So you get 120 days in Portugal with the permit. So once you've gone through the application, you get 120 days from when you set foot in Portugal to then complete the second part of the application, which you do in Portugal itself. And that's when you get the visa. So essentially the first part is a permit to travel to Portugal to either buy your land in that time, complete your application, matriculate your vehicle. That could be a van that's self-build like us, or a motorhome, or your family car, or whatever it is. So for those that don't know, if you take any vehicle to Portugal, you have to matriculate it, which means that it's inspected by Portuguese garage, who give you a certificate of conformity and then change the vehicle from a UK or American vehicle over to Portuguese plates. You then have to get a Portuguese driving license and blah-de-blah-de. So where we're at is we're basically at the point where we can make our appointment with the embassy. It was protracted by us because we were going to stay on friends' land. And they said you can stay here as long as you like until you complete your visa. But we'd heard online from somebody that again, it's typical Portugal. There are some people who said we didn't provide hardly any evidence of where we were staying, and we got our permit no problem. Somebody else said we applied and they wouldn't accept our
Wow.
address that we were going to stay at because it needed to be notarized
Okay.
by Portugal. So what we've done is the couple that are helping us out in Portugal, originally we just had a letter from them saying they're going to stay on our land, and we thought that would be great, and it may well have been fine.
Yeah.
But we decided again to avoid delays that we would get that notarized. So that was protracted by COVID because all the notaries in Portugal are shut. So they then had to drive to Lisbon, take their passports, their deeds of ownership, their NIF numbers, their Portugal residency cards, take them to a solicitor, get them copied, notarized with a letter of invitation inviting us to Portugal to live on their land for a minimum of 120 days so that we can then go to you guys land. So that's done as of yesterday. The solicitor sent us back all the notarized information. So that's now... So
it's good to have that, I think, as you say. I mean, it may well have been absolutely fine, but when it's something as big as moving your family abroad, you know, there's no, for the sake of a piece of paper, just, you know, it would be really galling to not have that one bit of paper that they wanted you to have, wouldn't it? So I think you're absolutely right. Just you want to just tick every box and more if you need to, don't you, really?
Absolutely. Yep. And again, that's down to the information from the Portuguese side. It would appear that they might just accept a receipt from a campsite, and then some people have said, yeah, we did that, was fine, they were all cool, and then other people said, we did that and they wouldn't accept it. So there's no sort of real... It
is a historical thing. I think it's the theme that runs in Portugal, and I'm sure in a lot of other European countries as well, actually, that it very much varies on who you speak to on the day or where you go. It seems to be, I mean, people had this when they were applying for residency, you know, before Brexit happened. People get it when they're moving from other European countries and want to become resident in Portugal. And it can really depend on the office you go to or literally the person you speak to. It just seems to be whatever they decide on the day could vary a lot. Makes it harder.
It does.
But I think if you tick every box, you don't need to worry. You know, you're going to be making sure you're making even the most heavily, you know, even the heaviest requirements are going to be ticked. Then you don't need to worry about it, do you? Then
no. So that was our kind of goal. Apart from achieving that for ourselves, was once we put it out on YouTube, we realised that there are a lot of people that were interested in going through the same thing, but they were unable to find the information out. So we figured, well, if we put the information out there, then people can follow that journey, and it makes it a lot easier for them. So
great. It's such a good idea. It really is. I'll share your YouTube link in a moment as well, actually, so people can... I'll put it up. There we go. So this is how people can follow you on YouTube. Yep. I'll also put some links, because I think you've got your Instagram account as well, haven't you? So I'll put, when we share the video and the podcast out, I'll make sure that all of the links are clickable in there so people can actually find them as well. So if anybody wants to sort of follow your journey in between when we're catching up and see all the other bits you're up to, because you're up to all sorts, aren't you? You know, you've got some great information about the ban and things like that there as well. So I'm sure people would love to see a little bit more of an in-depth view of life and follow you around.
and for anybody that's watching that isn't living in a van like myself and my family, that's kind of irrelevant to the process other than the matriculation of the van.
Yes.
So if you're just thinking of moving to Portugal and becoming a resident, or you're a motorhomer who would like a bit more freedom by being in Portugal, still all applies. So you can essentially ignore the fact that we live in a van in terms of making the D7 process.
Yes, the D7's relevant. Yeah. Does it matter if you are self-employed, or does it help to be employed, or does it make any real difference in terms of using that as a access to get into the country, or not really?
I think the simple answer is there isn't a simple answer, because again the information is protracted by the Portuguese side. But
okay,
what you basically need is some form of passive income. So that could be somebody who has retired and has a pension, or it could be somebody that is renting out a property in the UK and they have an income from that, or it could be somebody that has savings in an account, or it could be a whole load of things.
Yeah.
So for us, we kind of meet it on two sides. We have a passive income because we both work remotely, and B, we have more than the annual requirement in our bank account. So
Great, yeah.
I would imagine that if we present our bank account, they would say that's fine because we kind of have double the minimum required without looking at our assets or our jobs. So the idea of the visa in simple terms is that you move to Portugal, but you have some form of income outside of Portugal so that you can sustain yourself and not become a burden on the Portuguese state, is the kind of simple terms.
And it's a fairly decent amount though, isn't it, really? I mean, I think I think people were quite nervous originally as to how, you know, that it would be an unachievable amount of money, but actually it's a fairly, you know, it's reasonable, isn't it? And it's certainly achievable, I think, for most people in terms of what they're going to be living on in Portugal anyway, really, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the actual requirement for a single person is €7,200 per year. Or if you're a family or you've got a partner, then it's 7,200 for the lead applicant and 3,600 for the second applicant, I think.
Yeah,
So
which is pretty reasonable, isn't it, really? I mean, you know, at the end of the day, not many people are going to Portugal and not thinking about what they're going to be living on at some point anyway, really. So I think I think it's for the average person, I'm sure it's relatively achievable in one, as you say, especially as there are several different forms that can come in. You know, it's not like it has to be from an employed contract or something like that only, you know.
No, so I mean, it could be somebody that isn't working, but they have that money in the bank, or as I said a minute ago, it could be somebody that has retired and has that coming in as a pension, or it could even be something indirect. It could be somebody who invests in shares and bonds, and they have a proof that they have that amount coming in annually from doing that as work.
Yeah.
It could be somebody working online. I mean, it's not a massive amount of money for the vast majority of people.
Yeah. I'm sure it's what most people are. Yeah, exactly. And most people would be expecting to have that to live on anyway. So, you know, there would be some form of income generally. That's great though. I mean, and so now I assume from what you're saying, then you're waiting now for the borders to open again and you can start to actually get the next stages underway effectively, because there's only so far you can go now until you can actually get over to Portugal, is there?
Yeah, so the next stage, which is where we're at now, is we've got all the information that is required to make the first application. So you apply through the Portuguese embassy, but the actual appointment is managed by an international company who manage visas, which is a company called VFS Global. So you make an appointment with VFS Global, and then you attend the appointment, you show them the evidence that's required, and there's some paperwork that you have to complete in advance. So you take everything along, and then assuming that you've got everything required, under Portuguese law, they have to process the application between London, in our case, but it could apply in America or any other third country, over to Portugal, and then you'll by law, the visa has to be approved or disapproved within 60 days.
Wow, okay.
So from the day we have our appointment, you've got 2 months, 60 days, when we'll either get the, yes, that's fine, here's your permit, off you go to Portugal, or you're missing this information, please provide that. But in our case, I'm really confident that we haven't got anything missing because we've got more than is required. So to answer your question,
exciting.
It is. So as soon as so I imagine if we went to our appointment next week or the week after, depending when the next appointment is, then maybe 4 weeks later, 6, 7, 8 weeks later, we'll get the permit, which is the first part of the visa. And when we spoke to the consul before Portugal went into its current pretty restricted lockdown, the French border was already closed, but the consul said we would get a permit to travel. So even though that it was closed, we could still go to Portugal. But I think in reality, at the moment, with Portugal having its border, you know, there's all these pretty hardcore restrictions in Spain and Portugal. So hopefully by the time we get the permit or the first part of the visa, those restrictions may no longer be in.
Have lifted up a bit.
So as soon as we feel it's a combination of safe to travel, legal to travel, we'll shoot across on the Eurotunnel, head off through France fairly quickly, stop off in Spain for a few days, and then get into Portugal, go to our friend's land, and then we'll start looking for land to buy ourselves.
Amazing. Have you got a time limit from when you get given the first part that you're talking about, which then means you can head over? Is there a time limit that you've got from getting that first stage okay to then getting over and onto the place that you said you're going to be staying, or not?
I haven't been able to find an answer for that, so that was something I was going to ask when we have our appointment.
Okay.
What would normally happen is if you get the approved permit for the first part of the visa, that normally kicks in the minute you arrive in Portugal.
Right.
Let's say we had our visa today and there were no COVID restrictions, and we left and we took a week to get from England to Portugal. As soon as we cross the Portugal border, we've got 120 days in Portugal to complete
to get going.
the second part of the visa. And in that 120 days, you can leave Portugal twice, but no more. So the idea is you've got a 4-month window to then complete the next part. So
that sounds great. I mean, I'm sure that there'll be some allowances at the moment. Obviously, if the borders are closed, then they're going to understand that people can't physically go over yet anyway. So it'll be interesting to see how that all goes. But it sounds really, I mean, it sounds like you've ticked all the boxes. And like you say, I think you have good reason to feel pretty positive about it. And it's great. It's great to hear somebody's first-hand account of the real version of what's actually in store, you know?
So let's hope that the restrictions ease off a little bit in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah. Well, maybe what we'll do is we'll try and catch up with you. I mean, we'll keep in touch online, I'm sure anyway, Dom, but maybe we'll try and arrange to catch up with you on the other side of your appointments once you've heard back from them, and, you know, give it a few weeks to see sort of how things are going and how the borders are going and things like that. And we'll make sure we catch up with you in the meantime and see how you're doing on the next stage.
Sounds good. So yeah, the next stage is really just going to our appointment. So I imagine that'll be in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, great.
And then it's just a waiting
good stuff.
game.
It sounds brilliant. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm sure that there's going to be so many people who, who are regular visitors to Pure Portugal who are going to be relieved to hear your version of events, which was my hope, really, is that, you know, I think it would be nice. It's not nice seeing people panicking over information that isn't actually correct anyway. So it's really nice to see a real human being doing it and actually get an account for that. It's great. And people can obviously follow you on your YouTube and your Instagram, which I'll share, so they can pick up where we've left off and maybe look a little bit of, you know, they can watch back as well and see sort of what's led you to this point now as well. And sort of see how you're doing in between.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've got lots of videos on our YouTube, but we've done 2 videos currently on the D7 Portugal process.
Yeah.
So if people are interested in applying, they can follow that, and we've got all the links and all the information and broken down the kind of negatives as to, are they actually generally negatives, but no, they're not.
Yeah,
so really, for anyone applying, what I'd say is although there are hoops, as with anything bureaucratic, applying for a visa is not a small step, but in reality, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, it doesn't have to feel absolutely terrifying and insurmountable, does it? Yeah.
And if you follow all the links in the comments of the YouTube, then you can essentially bypass the grief that we had finding the information, because it's all there.
Great. It's so lovely when people are willing to share that sort of information and get that sort of detail out there as well. Because I think, you know, this is a key, you know, moving to Portugal for some people has been a lifelong dream. It's been a dream of their, you know, for their families for such a long time. And whether you're coming from like you say, from Australia, America, or now the UK, who are in the same situation, it doesn't need to feel like a great big brick wall's been built up, does it? It can actually, there are ways in, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm on the there's an American Facebook page for people applying for the visa, and I follow that as well and help people out as well, because obviously as a third country, it's the same for us as it is for them. But generally, I think everybody that applies for the visa eventually gets the visa.
It's just making sure you're ticking the boxes, aren't you, really, and giving them the papers that they need. Yeah.
And sometimes they're pretty generous. So I've seen somebody that didn't meet the income criteria, but they spoke to the consul, and the consul basically overrode it and said, okay, I'm going to approve. So there is room for, I think, the Portuguese.
All isn't lost. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's all I think most people are wanting, isn't it? You know, people who want to move over to Portugal have a genuine, real reason to want to live there. And, you know, I'm sure that where possible, you know, Portugal will, you know, and the officials will understand that that's the point of view. You know, that obviously there are some bits that requirements they're going to want to be meeting, but that's amazing to hear that. That's great. So it's always worth checking, basically, is really the answer, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the Portuguese side, I think they're more interested in people that are going to Portugal for a combination of they love the country, they want to integrate somehow with the local community, economically bring something to Portugal. So, for example, that might be you want to start a permaculture thing on your land, and you're going to bring people in and I can't think of the word, but you want to. There's a lot of land in Portugal that's obviously not used. So if you're going to bring,
it does. There's so much regeneration to do, isn't there?
That's the word I was looking for. Regeneration. Look, joining in now. Hello, mate. So I guess come back to you in a couple of weeks and let you know where we're at with our application.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, we're all crossing our fingers for you, and hopefully you'll get that appointment really soon, and we can hear the next stage. It's really exciting. I can't wait to see you arrive and see what happens. I think it'll be fab. It'll be really great to watch.
And if anyone's got any questions, wherever you post this out, I'm happy to answer people's questions wherever
Fabulous.
possible.
That's great. Yeah, well, I'll stick it onto all of our Facebook groups and pages, and I may actually make a blog page for it as well, so it can be more easily referred to. So, you know, otherwise it's hard to share in the future if people are asking questions about it. So I'm sure there'll be several places people can pick it up. But if I see any questions and you've missed them, I'll make sure to send them over to you.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a really lovely day, and we'll catch up soon.
And you. Talk soon.
Thanks, Dom. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.